It was a moonless night, and the highway stretched endlessly into the darkness. Mark, Sarah, and Jake were driving back from a weekend camping trip, the thrill of the outdoors still fresh in their minds. The car's headlights cut through the blackness, illuminating only the road ahead. Suddenly, a sharp turn came out of nowhere. Mark swerved to avoid it, but the car skidded, the tires screeching against the asphalt. They came to a halt with a jolt, and in the confusion, Jake was thrown against the door. He groaned in pain, clutching his arm, which was bleeding badly. "Damn it, Jake, are you okay?" Mark asked, panic lacing his voice. "I'll be fine, but I need something to stop the bleeding," Jake replied, wincing. Sarah rummaged through the car, but there was no first aid kit, no bandages, nothing. They were miles from the nearest town, and the highway was deserted. Then, through the darkness, Sarah spotted something in the distance. A faint light flickered, casting an eerie glow over a large, shadowy structure. "Look, over there!" she exclaimed. "It looks like a hospital." Mark squinted, trying to make out the details. The building was old, its windows shattered, and the walls covered in ivy. It looked abandoned, but the light— it was as if someone, or something, was beckoning them. "We don't have a choice," Mark said, helping Jake out of the car. "Let's check it out." The three of them approached the building, the wind howling through the empty parking lot. The hospital loomed before them, a relic of a time long forgotten. The front doors were slightly ajar, creaking as they pushed them open. Inside, the air was thick with decay. The smell of burnt wood and stale air filled their nostrils. The corridors were dark, the walls lined with peeling paint and rusted medical equipment. A wheelchair stood in the middle of the hallway, facing them as if it had been waiting. "Let's find something to help Jake," Mark said, his voice low. They moved cautiously through the hospital, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The flickering lights overhead cast long, shifting shadows, making the walls seem to close in around them. As they turned a corner, the wheelchair they had passed earlier was now at the end of the hallway, facing them again. Did that move?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Mark shook his head, trying to stay rational. "It's just the wind or something." But then, the wheelchair began to roll towards them on its own, its wheels squeaking in the silence. The three of them froze, watching in horror as it stopped just inches from Jake's injured leg. "Let's get out of here," Jake muttered, fear overtaking the pain. They continued down the hallway, but the hospital seemed to come alive around them. Doors slammed shut without warning, gurneys rolled out from darkened rooms, and the lights flickered violently, plunging them into darkness before sputtering back on. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from behind them. They spun around to see a hospital bed being flung against the wall by an unseen force. The air grew colder, and a low, guttural moan reverberated through the corridor. "What the hell is happening?" Sarah cried, her eyes wide with terror. Mark grabbed her hand, pulling her along as they stumbled through the maze of hallways. They reached the emergency room, where they hoped to find some supplies. The room was eerily intact, as if it had been preserved in time. But as they searched, the lights flickered once more, and a figure appeared in the corner. A nurse, or what was left of her, stood there. Her face was charred, her uniform tattered and blackened. Her eyes were hollow, staring at them with a mixture of sorrow and rage. She reached out, her burnt fingers trembling as if in pain. "Help me," the nurse whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling of phantom flames. Mark backed away, but Sarah was frozen in place, unable to look away from the apparition. The nurse took a step forward, and as she did, the room was suddenly engulfed in flames. The walls burned with an unnatural fire, the heat searing their skin. "Run!" Mark shouted, pulling Sarah from her trance. They bolted out of the room, the flames licking at their heels. The hospital was now a labyrinth of fire and smoke, the screams of the dead echoing in their ears. They raced down the corridors, dodging falling debris and collapsing ceilings. Finally, they burst through the front doors, collapsing onto the cold, damp grass outside. The hospital loomed behind them, its windows glowing with an eerie light. But as they watched, the flames slowly died down, and the building returned to its lifeless, abandoned state. Breathing heavily, Mark looked back at the hospital, trying to make sense of what had happened. "What? What was that?" Jake asked, his voice shaking. Sarah, still in shock, whispered, "This hospital. It was closed down years ago. There was a fire that killed everyone inside. The patients, the doctors, they all burned alive." Mark nodded, piecing it together. "And now, they're trapped here, reliving their final moments." As the realization sank in, the faint light in the hospital flickered once more, before going out completely, leaving them in darkness. They got back into the car, their hearts pounding, and drove away as fast as they could, leaving the haunted hospital and its restless spirits behind. But as they sped down the highway, Mark glanced in the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, he thought he saw the nurse standing at the edge of the road, her burnt face illuminated by the moonlight. And then she was gone.